we launched this report, Reinventing Internal Controls in the Digital Age. It's just talking about how emerging technologies and new technologies are going to impact the design and the operation of internal control systems. So I think one of the most obvious, but probably the most relevant questions that I'll ask the panel quickly, one by one, is really what is the main takeaway from this report. They received copies of this report before coming here, so they had a chance to read it. But maybe just to share, what is the main takeaway? Maybe starting with the Rose. I'm sorry, what I think.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be in the panel. I just accepted 2 days ago. So, having read the reports only last night, the main takeaway is we can't be complacent. And if you ask me where I am now today, I'm never up to the mark that I'm satisfied because things change so quickly and so drastically. Everything that we do today may be obsolete the next day. So take, for instance, where I am today, which is Mandai Park Holdings. We are building the new park. If you do not know, the Jurong Bird Park is going to move to Mandai very soon. As soon as we complete, we are building a new rainforest park, and we're having some indoor attractions and an eco-friendly lodge. So all these things has got a very important element called technology, and it's not about today, it's about in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, when things are, completed in phases. So to me, internal controls will be the key in terms of creating value. You can't be stagnant and you have to move with the time. Just borrow a term called minimum viable product. You use it in a lot of marketing tools, but to me, this becomes an MVP. You must have it. It's not a choice. Any digital experience that my team is building in terms of the indoor attraction, in terms of the new parks, has got an element of data collection. And the more data they collect, the CFO become even more worried. But if I don't look at it, I'm behind the game. So it's a chicken and egg thing. I was just sharing with Joseph. We have a very, very intensive meeting yesterday at the management team looking at credit card fraud. So whose job is that? Finance, IT, sales, operation? There's no first answer. And if you benchmark against the top zoo in the world, like San Diego Zoo, because of their size, they do have a team of no less than 4 persons looking at fraud, online fraud. 4 persons, and guess where it sits? In the sales department. So very interesting. So when I start talking to people in other organizations, we look at the cost and benefit. So to me, the minimum viable product would be things that has to be minimally acceptable in terms of the risk tolerance as of today, and how can I embed technology to help me, and not to expose the organization. So if anybody would ask me, cybersecurity risk in my risk register is always in the top agenda. A year ago, they kind of wanted to convince me that that element should move to the amber zone. I say no. With so many things happening, it should stay in the red zone. So our eyeball is always on cybersecurity because it doesn't stop changing and makes us worried all the time. We need to be very, very agile in terms of learning and adapting. Sorry for a long answer, but I'm so passionate about this topic. That's why I'm here today.
Sure.
Thank you.
Vincent?
So my personal view is always that internal control, digitizing it is very important, but there are dilemmas. I heard of one CFO who became more busy after implementing. It's Datalogic, I don't know who. But this CFO spent money and became more busy himself, has less defense, but still have to be done. Still has to be done. So my personal view is that internal control, digitizing it is the key.
So does digitalization improve efficiency or does it not?
Improve efficiency for the other teams, not the CFO. You got to work harder. That's what you are supposed to do.
All right. Okay, let's come to an internal audit perspective. Derrick?
I feel the goals don't change for internal audit. It's still very relevant. It's just that the environment has changed quite a bit. The tools have changed quite a bit. And although the report is very forward-looking, I feel that there are a lot of still many unanswered environment question type things that we have to focus on. Things like data, who owns data, right? Things like roles and responsibilities, So it's not so simple as just talking about the technology itself.
So you've given us some ideas on the sequels to the report.
So thanks. So I wasn't involved in writing the report or shaping the content, so I can say without bias that I thought it's a great report. And what I particularly like is I think it does a great job in putting all this emerging technology in a very accessible manner and putting the risk heart and center of it. So it's not an afterthought, it's heart and center of it. So I thought that is really great. If I can call out just one element from that report, I was a couple of weeks back at a ASEAN conference for accountants in Bali. So people say, you go to Bali for work? Sure. But it was really work. And I was sitting on a panel talking about professional skepticism. So my frame of mind is on professional skepticism. So while reading the report, I was really delighted to see professional skepticism being drawn out as an important element. And in the professional skepticism, from an auditor's perspective, in the past, we traditionally think of it as the auditor's domain. But increasingly, there's realization that it is a much broader professional skill that not just auditors need to have, but professional accountants in general. And just speaking to my other hat, which is the ACCA hat, ACCA qualification in recent years, when we revise it, talking about professional and strategic level, we actually included professional skepticism as one of professional skills. And how does it play in the technology space? I think it's very important for us to then reflect back on what does it really mean. It is a state of mind, right? It is a mindset, and it is having that very questioning mind, right? And what does it really mean in practice? I think it is about being bold. It is about being unafraid to challenge the norm, being unafraid to challenge the authority, perhaps. And it's not just taking everything that's been given to you and say, well, technology is great, technology is good, there's business value in it, and just take it on. But what are the underlying issues, right? So looking below the surface. So I think that is a very important consideration, and I was, as I said, very happy that the report drew it out as a very key point for everyone to consider.
Thank you. And Mark is one of the authors of the report, so what are your responses to the views? Vincent's view on digitalization, you may not become, the CFO may not become more efficient because of digitalization, or that, there are certain things that, in terms of data, right, which Derrick raised, that could perhaps be, discussed further. And of course, Chun's point and Wai Peng's point, relating to professional skepticism, the human aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a couple of things. So one, just to reflect and agree in terms of comments around skepticism. That's why we raised it specifically in the report. A lot of questions are, what's the future of finance? What's the future of internal audit teams, and what's their role? One of the biggest things they bring is skepticism. That's really, really important when we're looking at all these tools to be able to say, is the outcome I'm getting from my tool, my RPA or my AI, whatever, is it in line with what I'd expect? Is it actually the right outcome or not? There's a huge risk as we adopt these new technologies, we just assume what the system says is right. And that gets back to the other fundamental point here. We are talking about a lot about technologies, but actually when we think about data, data is a business asset. It's the business side and the business knowledge which is key. So as we start looking at this, you need to be thinking about, actually the owners of this is not the technology department, it's business. Business owns data, data drives business. So it does mean, in some respects, we're going to be more efficient in terms of what we go and do, because we can do things faster, and we're more effective. Effectiveness is a double-edged sword, as Vincent said. With effectiveness, we can do more coverage, which might mean we have more exceptions. That can cause workload, which is a big problem sometimes. And there's a balance there between being bleeding edge on some of these areas and being a follower. Because if I find lots of exceptions but no one else is, am I at a competitive disadvantage? Longer term, there will be no excuse though. So one of the other big emphasis of the report is actually knowledge is key. Understanding what these things, how you can apply with these things. Recognise you can't do everything today, but having that continuous scanning of what's possible and thinking through from a business context is critical.
Yeah, thanks. So when you're talking about professional skepticism, obviously you mean the professional skepticism of a human intervening in the system. And of course, we heard about Vincent's dilemma, about human and how much humans should do. Why aren't you using the machine and so on and so forth. I mean, does an internal control system ideally need to be fully automated? I do not know. Let's explore that question. But if it is automated, then where does human intervention come in? At which points? Is it during the creation and design of the system, or is it while the system is operating? How much of human intervention should there be? I mean, if there is human intervention, does it make the system more inefficient? So, question is, how does human intervention interplay with the machine in terms of creating the ideal internal control system? Anybody? Maybe Vincent is nodding his head. He obviously has a lot of views on this. Yeah.
So human intervention is a very key reason why we automate, right? So just now I had a speech and talk about becoming more busy after automating. But please don't get me wrong, because I was pointing out the bad part. The good part is that previously I have to hire someone to go and do the check. Now the system automatically goes into my SAP, check every single transaction, every partner, customer, vendor, and churn out that potential list. A lot of saving is already done. No human intervention period. I mean, there's some at the design phase, but after that, no more. So of course, towards the end, when the exception comes in, where AI at this point, or machine learning at this point, is not able to handle the judgmental items, the subjective item, that's where I think human intervention is still quite key, and that's applicable to my company.
Yeah, so basically, I think even Mark pointed out about the fact that there are exceptions and could be some bleeding in the system. So we have this thing called robotic process automation. It's supposed to sort of wrap up all these exceptions and things like that. Does RPA play a big part in internal control systems?
I just want to take a step back. So many organizations use automated controls already. So for example, many of you have things like three-way match. So you think about three-way match as a basic process which we've been living with for a long, long time. That's an automated process. When you set that up, when you first test it, you do test it, make sure it works. And then you monitor it and say, okay, is it working over a period of time? You test it on a regular basis. The frequency of testing is assigned based on the risk associated with it. Are you making changes to the environment around it, et cetera, et cetera? So similarly, RPA is just simply automating a manual task that's perhaps happening today, putting a process above where it automates it. So when you're setting these things up, you've got to test it in the same way you test an automated control, a new system implementation, and you monitor it in the same way associated with the risk that's happening. When you start going to machine learning, and then things can evolve over time, obviously that monitoring needs to continue in a different way. This is where skepticism comes in, because you start defining, what is my tolerance? Where do I start saying, okay, actually I think it's going off track, and how do I measure that? So I don't think some of this is, at its most basic level, complicated. It's just getting back to basics and using basic premise of how we've always operated, but applying it to the new technologies, not being afraid or confused or bamboozled by vendors or whoever it happens to be around what the technologies do.
So Chun, is professional skepticism and human intervention so important in internal control system 4.0?
So I mentioned the
Fully
Bali
automated.
conference, right? And at the conference, we had the president of IFAC addressing the audience. And the first thing he said was, it's such a great time to be an accountant. It's such a great time to be an accountant. I repeat that. Now I remember when I was a trainee auditor, like more than 20 years ago, I spent one whole week trying to do bank reconciliation, right? And the ledger was really ledger, like book so big, right? You have to flip, and it's like so heavy. And I spent the first week in my proper job shredding paper, filing, and all that. Now, that's not proper training. That's not proper training. And there are a lot of things that can be automated that makes life so much easier. Now, I think of, and on my flight back, I watched this Spider-Man movie. So we know Spider-Man is Spider-Man because it was bitten by a radioactive spider. So in a way, I thought, maybe equipping ourselves with technology is a little bit like being bitten by a radioactive spider, right? So we talk about professional skepticism. What is it? It is a smell test, right? It's that enhanced sense. And if you get bitten by a radioactive spider, you get that enhanced sense of smell. So the technology will allow you to go beyond crunching the numbers so that you see the result and then you can reflect on it immediately. And at the board, IAASB, so in our most recent meeting, we had an expert in AI who came in. We had an expert on data analytics who came in. And basically, AI was described as a pattern recognition machine on steroid, right? So what they are really good at is just recognizing patterns. So, and they were telling us that, with AI, there's a very high possibility of recognizing fraud. There's a very high possibility of recognizing possibility of misstatements. So what the auditors need to do is just take that and investigate, right? And of course, I'm simplifying it tremendously. But I think that's the opportunity that is offering to CFOs, to CAOs in this room. Right?
So now I'm getting very confused, okay? Because you're saying that the machine learning itself raises questions, right? And the human goes about trying to validate it. I thought the human should be asking the question and the machine validates, So which is the human function and which is professional skepticism, the questions that humans ask, cannot the robot or the machine also ask those questions by evaluating data and so on and so forth? In fact, they can do it we do in hours, they can do it in seconds, right? So any takers for that rather difficult question?
Not exactly that question, but I just wanted to address a point that was just slightly before that. I think you got to realize now that we're actually at the very cusp of something very big. If you look at organizations, the way they are set up, right? There's a finance function, there's a sales function, there is people who do procurement, and they set up to do that particular activity. And traditionally, controls have always been seen as along that function. How you verify a purchase order, the authorization you get for a purchase order, how do you check whether an invoice is correct. So traditionally, all the while what we learn in school is that we look for the control sets, normally in the area that the organization is cut off, right? Cut up in. But now, because of the digital revolution, control sets now involve many, many other departments, right? And it's more efficient as well. So much so that from a control standpoint, you actually wonder whether they are internal to a department or a division, So for example, let's take SIA, for example. If I was just talking to the panel earlier on, we said that we have an account, right, for service recovery, we call it. That means when we perform our services poorly, we pay our passengers, right? Or if our plane gets delayed, we pay our passengers, right? So it goes into account and sits in the finance department. So now if the finance department needs to verify whether that account is correct or not, you could check out all the vouchers that were presented given to the customers and tally them and do your sequence counting and all that. But then there's also something that sits, some bit of information that sits elsewhere. If this account handles only aeroplane delays, right? Inside our flight operations, right? All the plane movements are recorded, right? So all the delays, the information of delays are there. So you can correlate delays that happen in another department, which is a third-party department, to actually what the finance pays. I'm looking at Vincent because he's finance, right? So, so it's a new way of looking at controls, right?
Yeah.
And that's internal. You can even take it up to external in future, right? If all the airports in the world, it's embedded information of delays and what and all that, that information can also be used, right? So I think we are at this cusp of having a new way to think about control structures, and it's no more just on organizational lines. The way you have what department, a finance department. Vincent's example was actually quite clear also. The denials list, it probably sits in the compliance department, and now it could be done by anybody, if you have that sort of. So it's a very interesting world that you guys are coming into. I'm retired, so good luck to you.
Yeah, so fantastic. Great question. And actually, this particular question was explored in the report. It's part of the key finding of the report. How do we think of internal controls? Do we still think of them as internal, as controls become more embedded in supply chains, right? And not only in a different department, but in different legal entities, how do we manage the ecosystem? CFOs have a responsibility to report on internal controls. How are they going to report when they are so far away? And do you have to monitor the supply controls within the supply chain? Supply chain meaning not only in Singapore, but it extends beyond our borders. So I think Wai Peng has taken an extreme view. Let's hear from her.
Well, I think you don't have a choice, as I always mention, because the world is so integrated now. Everything connects to one another. So where I am today, we liaise with people all over the world. So we are talking about bring the zoo to, as far off as the US, to Europe, to other parts of Asia. So how can we digitalize that experience? This person that I happened to sit next to in a dinner conversation, he said, do you know what you guys are doing? You're actually creating memories for everybody that touches the ground in Singapore. So how can we bring this off to people far, far, far away from here? So with this come the cybersecurity risk, data risk. So I was just sharing with the panel, we don't have a choice in terms of not working with a lot of travel agents because that's where your outreach can go beyond the boundaries of Singapore. So there's a lot of partnerships. So to what extent you trust their data, to what extent you open your API to integrate with them. So you need to make a very, very deliberate choice. What sort of costs and benefits, etc. So the entire ecosystem is very, very vibrant. You will really, really need to look at data governance from end to end. And this is not sitting in just finance, IT, or sales or operation. It's everybody. Then comes to culture within the organization. How can you train everybody from the top to the bottom, to the guy that's selling the tickets? If you come to my park, you see someone selling the ticket. Do they understand what data governance is? Do they know what to do and what not to do when somebody asks them a question? So these are the challenges that we grapple with every day. And to the extent that we can relay the message in the most simple way, not talk about RPA, etc. They may not know what this is. So not an easy solution. We are embarking on a training journey. So I told some of my department heads who is coming up with a training deck, I said minimally one of the chief, we have a few chiefs in our organization, should sit in the training so that the staff knows that this is driven from top down. And we are talking about cybersecurity risk, data awareness, data governance. So not an easy task, like I mentioned earlier on. This is something that keeps me awake almost every day. It's not so much about the business not doing well. When the business is doing very well, you are exposed yourself to a lot of data points, from suppliers to partners to people that you liaise with.
So if there's such a large area of exposure and attack surface, as it were, when the board asks you, right, as a CFO, how are the internal controls? Are they intact? As a CFO, what do you say?
I will always tell them I'm not there, and not that we are being exposed, meaning things happen so quick and so vibrantly. So in a scale of 1 to 10, maybe 5.5, and the reason is not because we are not doing good enough. Things happen almost every other day. And the weakest link is not about technology. Doesn't mean more is better. The weakest link is actually human. So human is the weakest link, as we have seen certain cases in Singapore, SingHealth, etc. The culture and the way we encourage our people to speak up. When you see something, please speak up. So I always tell my team, you are the eyes and ears for me, because I can't be everywhere all the time. So if you see anything, do let us know. I think this is so important so that people are encouraged to speak up and to whistleblow, etc. And the more we improve, the more we find out the things that we need to patch up, the better we are as a team. And we try not to find fault with people who come up and speak up. We encourage them, and the CEO himself play a very, very critical role, and he's a good role model for all of us as well.
So eyes and ears, I think the emerging technologies gives us a lot of opportunities. You've got cameras, sensors in the IoT, you've got drones. Right?
Not yet. We are building the new part, as I mentioned. So we have this important IT master plan that we partner with a very big IT company to bring us along the journey, because architects and engineers look at things from a very different perspective. So you need the tech people to come in and take a look at where we are today, because things will only be completed in 2 to 3 years' time, especially the eco-friendly lodge. So in the eco-friendly lodge, what sort of technology you want it to be? When people come in, do they see the aircon or do they have another layer of experience whereby they can contribute to sustainability? So we are very, very strong in terms of sustainability, in terms of biodiversity and also conservation work, but we don't shout out that loud so people don't really know. So in the new part, we will do a lot more so the Mandai as a precinct will be very different from the Mandai now.
All right, okay. Interesting. So if any of you all have any questions, if you don't want to use the app, you can just stand up and ask your questions. Is anybody on the wants to ask? Even the presentations that went before us. I see a lot of questions here. One specific question to Vincent. Vincent, I'm trying to dramatize this, but I'm trying to role play. So the person asks, Vincent, what's the AI you use to automate trade compliance?
There are many vendors in the world. The one that I use is called Amber Road. So if you're free, go into internet and just search Amber Road, no space. Amber, A-M-B-E-R, Road. So this system is not exclusive to just this vendor. There are quite a few in the world. And the key to this kind of system is the interface into your company's ERP. At the same time, learn what are applicable, what are potential hits. So some of the potential hits I just mentioned are also false hits. What are the false hits? And the machine will learn that these are false hits around the world. Could be another company, could be another region. And over time, become more intelligent and do it. So it's not, I'm not advertising for this company. I'm using it, Amber Road. But the one piece of advice is that when you implement it, it's quite painful at the beginning. But after that, you will be fine. After that, you'll be fine.
Okay, your conclusions are becoming more and more optimistic as we go along, so that's good. So Derrick, there's a question for you. In the long run, will there be less demand for internal auditors as a job can be replaced by technology?
No, that might be so in a very, very long run called infinity. But I think we still got quite a long way to go. I mean, if you look at organizational structures, right? I mean, we talk about data, right? Now, all the tools that you talk about, blockchain and all that, right? But in reality, what happens today? I mean, we are building 90% of our organizations here are building control sets based on departments, divisions, right? And then with all these new tools, what will happen is that the first part that you will expand it is to build it control sets that involve different parts of the organization trying to, what do you call it, right? And then after you're done with that, if you're ever done with that, because you know the politics of that, I mean, you know, going to another department and asking for a report, a sales report, and then they will tally with this thing or whatever, you know. If organizations can overcome that, then we talk about the other circle, which is external data, right? And whether we can build these bridges to have this external data. And even that circle is moving all the while to what is relevant today may not be relevant tomorrow, right? So I don't think there are many organizations here today that have even sorted out the internal sets. So I mean, you ask yourself, how many of your controls within your companies actually correlate to another department data checking or your current data, or you know, or any other forms. You know, I think that's very little of it. And to get to this stage before you actually reach the external stage, you need power, right? And you could see that. I mean, in the government, right? You know, I don't know, you know, if your IC and your change of address and all that affects so many different government divisions, right? Your license is also linked to what you put in. Once you die, right, all the departments, CPF will be updated, your income tax, all will be updated. So the question I have for you is this: is that a department or is that something external? They're all different bodies with different goals, right? But because they have been able to harness technology to have this information correlated amongst all of them, that's why they, you know, but you need power to do that, right? External, you think it's not easy. We have to overcome a lot of things. Even SIA had a partner, say Chris Shop, which we didn't used to own. Chris Shop collects information, right, from you all who buy things from Chris Shop, right? Let's say SI took over Chris Shop, okay, but before that, right, Chris Shop owns information. Now, if I wanted to check those information against what SIA's Chris Flyer members, do you think Chris Shop has the right to give the information to what you call it? It's all available, right? But the rules nowadays, and you know, the focus on data, what do you call it, privacy and all that, it's going to create a lot of issues. And after, even if you can overcome that, then there are new risk types, which I think you alluded on, the governance of how data is transferred and used by one, what do you call it. So I don't think we're at that stage yet. We're not even close to that. That's my own feeling. I think where we'll be focusing on with all the new technology is internally, right? So that means we still have to overcome moving from departments, divisions, and into a database internally, and to improve the control structures. And audit is no different. Audit will ride on it and audit according to the principles that we've been taught, and you know, and hopefully be more efficient. You know.
So here again, we've got this internal-external dichotomy. I wonder whether you'll still be calling internal auditors internal, or, you know, because external auditors, the term has already been taken, so I do not know what you're going to call yourself. But if you want to read more about this dichotomy, of course, you can just use a mobile phone to, you know, just zap the QR code, and you can download the whole report, which is quite an extensive report. So there's another question for our member from IAASB, Chun. He has been working very, very hard, traveling to New York and so on and so forth. So there is a question here from the audience. We seem to be struggling at the business level on the future of internal controls. How is the IAASB helping from a global top-down perspective? Is the IAASB looking at control risks that are being introduced by emerging and new technologies? How are the accounting standards evolving to take this into account?
So I need at least an hour for that. But I recognize that we have mostly CFO and CAOs in this room, so I won't go into the technical details. But suffice to say that IAASB is keeping up with times, and there have been two pieces of report that has been issued already, looking at how the standards, so we're talking about auditing standards, can evolve, and how auditors need to be responding to, well, A, the clients adopting technology, and B, they themselves picking up technology to do their work better. So again, I won't go into detail, but I want to just emphasize the point that it is just a tremendous time for the profession to be responding and to be really value-adding. So one of the core of professional accountants for ACCA and for other professional accountants is that public value that you bring, right? So how do you respond to this? One way to respond to this is to lock yourself up and unplug everything, throw away everything, right? And try to function. And that is obviously not an option. You can't function in a vacuum. So the other alternative is to just face all the challenges head on. And I think as professional accountants, you have that responsibility, right, to actually do it. A couple of years ago, we had this report called Ethics in the Digital World. And we look at the 5 principal ethics value that accountants should have. We talk about integrity, objectivities, and so on. But the one principle that is most at risk is professionals' competence and due care. Why is that so? Because the world has moved on. If you don't keep up, you will not know what to do in the circumstances, which is why we have events like that, which is why we have reports like what we're producing. And I think it's just absolutely important that we keep up with all those changes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want more details on auditing standards, come talk to me after this. Yeah, I'll be happy to share that.
Okay, so I think time is running out, but just to summarize, I think we've heard a lot of views and perspectives, but I think two of the main things is really about the internal versus external. As we digitize, as we connect, that level of connectivity brings in opportunities as well as risks. You know, we are connected to supply chains, we're connected to different legal entities. You know, how do we cope with that in terms of reporting to the board on internal controls? What do we say to the board when the controls are not within our organization? Okay, that's something to think about. The other thing is to think about the human intervention. I mean, do we want to is there such a thing as a fully automated, internal control system, maybe in 10 years, 20 years' time? What is the role of humans in an automated internal control systems using the latest technology, including AI, including virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on and so forth, right? Those are two things that actually stand out. As a concluding question, maybe I'll just run this through the panel. Basically, according to the COSO framework, which is the most authoritative framework on internal controls, what they believe is that, with all this digitalization, with all this introduction of emerging technologies, the fundamental principles of internal controls remain the same. So there's a little bit of assurance, that whatever we learn in school still applies. But I want to ask, I want to question that, okay? Because with the greater connectivity, is there, in this internal-external dichotomy, is there some new principles that we haven't grasped yet? Is there something that we need to look at in terms of, beyond segregation of duties and, supervisory controls, process controls, and things like that? Controls, across the supply chain, across legal entities, the ecosystem, and so on and so forth. And I think some governments are actually building up this, are realizing these weaknesses, and they are looking at it, and they're trying to build controls within, country-wide controls and region-wide controls. So maybe I'll start with Mark.
Sure. So I think it's still relevant. I don't think it actually changes, but I think two key things. One is, I think, how we define control environment. So what's the breadth of the control environment? And particularly the risk around contagion. So the risk of interconnectivity, that everything is ultimately connected, and understanding what the risks associated with that are very, very important at an organisational level, but also at a country level and actually across countries, because that has a big impact. So understanding the control environment, how we define that and what the breadth of that is, internal and external of the organisation, is critical, and just the interconnectivity, whether it be interconnectivity of RPA or interconnectivity with suppliers, consumers, API, etc. That interconnectivity is the big driver of change.
Maybe you can touch on the Singapore government's initiatives.
So a couple of things just from a Singapore government standpoint, they're looking at very closely, particularly when we look at data. So IMDA is very keen that people don't overread PDPA, and that actually IMDA in Singapore is not anti in terms of sharing information. They are pro on protecting individuals' rights associated with information, but there's an enormous amount of debate going on. So some of the things they've been working through is, one is in terms of building a framework for how do you look at the value of data. And by looking at the value of data, then you start to understand the upside from data, but also the risks, and having a model or method of doing that. And so that's expected to come out in June timeframe. Associated with that also is building around frameworks for trust. So what are the prerequisites you need to have in place to not just manage data internally, but as you're relying on other parties or looking to provide information to third parties, what are the things you need to have in place to manage that? So trust frameworks are really key enablers for the economy. Because if you think about Singapore, and I'm proudly been here for 15 years, in the future economy, data is critical, but we're only 6 million people. We don't have much data. So we need to build, and Singapore's big competitive advantage is trusted location, the ability to enable these things. And if we can't get those things right, then we've got a problem. Because the unicorns, the growing companies are not necessarily here. They base themselves here because it's a great place to work from. But that data piece, and that's where the government's very focused right now.
Yeah, thank you. Should we, the nature and shape of controls will change, but will the principles remain the same?
Yes. No, I just want, so what Mark just said reminded me of one of the things that the AI expert said. So she's saying that since the 1970s, they've been trying to develop a profile for serial killers, but has been unsuccessful because there are not enough serial killers around. So data is key, but what is most important is the right kind of data, right? So I think a lot of time we think, well, you just need to feed sufficient data, but that's a training material. So within an organization, and this is what I heard, and this is secondhand information, is that it has to be pertinent to your organization, and that is really quite important. But to your question, if it's principle-based, it will remain pertinent. And from an auditing standards perspective, we are refreshing it. And one of the standards is about understanding the clients, understanding the entity, and that has COSO built within it. and we're refreshing it to make sure that all the terminology, all the considerations are current. Yeah.
So of course, with machine learning, you not only use real data, but you can use simulated data. You can sort of create, some form of data in order to supplement it. And I think in AI, they have used it to, with great results, as it were. Derrick?
Yeah, I think the principles remain the same. The auditing principles, the control principles remain the same. But
so we don't need to change the COSO framework at all?
No, but the lines that they created, the first line, second line, third line, fourth line of defense, has to be retaught out as to, what happens now. You have some little machine there that says what line is it and what is it and how does that interact between people who are using the control, who exercise the control, and people who develop these controls, right? So I think that's the principles remain the same. But just a little bit on all this automation, I think we are still some way away from it, because the world now is more interested in digitization, in data analytics, looking at the big things for their business, right? And when they look at things to do their business, the control sets will then come in. It's not this other way around. So I think all your businesses will be interested in how they can do it faster, better, cheaper, and all that, with all the tools that we have, with all the blockchain, with AI and all that. And then the step follows. I mean, there'll be a seat inside to talk about controls and all that, but that normally follows the main goals of the organization in each of the different areas. So we're still some ways from that.
So Vincent, with blockchain coming up on the scene, and maybe will help you with your problem also. If you're using it as in a form of like a trade net or something like that. With mathematical controls, being used in order to verify and validate. Segregation of duties, supervisory controls, are they still needed?
So absolutely, right?
Human supervisory.
Distributed ledgers, once it's implemented, it will certainly make the things much efficient and much effective. But I want to go back to your framework, and you mentioned whether we change our fundamental framework. Maybe not so much, but I think the application will certainly change. And I'd like to take Prof. Peter's speech just now, when you talk about the causality of disclosure and market value, your share price. And the tonality of that disclosure also affects the share price. And that is a very important point. The market is changing every day. The perception is changing every day. And if we set an internal control framework that is fixed, and then we say that, let's keep it that way, we may be in for a disaster. And I'm quite interested in this because I'm writing a paper quite close to what Peter mentioned as part of my PhD. And this is a very key item. We need to look at what the market is looking at, what the people are having perception as. And therefore, I agree the framework maybe does not change a lot, application change a lot.
So you're saying that the COSO framework should be more market-driven?
Brother, COSO framework, I don't dare to change the whole COSO framework, but the application to that.
No, but it's an interesting point that you brought up, which is
market-driven, yes.
Whether the COSO framework should have more inputs from the market.
Absolutely, that's my view.
Mark is here. I don't know whether you have any.
Look, I agree. I mean, I think it's not the framework changing, the principles remain, but it's looking at the application of what it is, and therefore what's the relevant risk. Again, I go back to its control environment. What is the control environment? What are the things that impact an organisation? And it's the risk assessment. There are new risks coming under there. There will always be new risks. So as a broad principle-based framework, it works. But it's the application of and the thought process through that needs to be continually challenged and revised on an ongoing basis. So it's that subtext, which is where standard bodies, etc., play a very, very important role to say, how do we look and analyse things as we go forward? So it's not the framework, it's so much it's the interpretation of and the challenge around that's important.
Thank you. And the last word goes to, YP.
Just to add on Vincent's point, I think another element that's so important is our brand equity. So to Prof. Session earlier on, we have to also look at, how the element of Coxwell framework impact the brand equity, and we look at that very closely because I'm in the tourism sector. So just not too long ago, the colleagues were sharing they were using a YouGov tracker, brand equity tracker, to see how effective some of the marketing programs is adding on to the bottom line. As CFO, we know that, when it comes to expense reduction, marketing tend to be one of the casualty, but I'm the other way around. I believe that marketing is very important to bring up the value, the image, and the brand equity of an organization. So looking at all these things, how does a Coxwell framework, adds on to the brand equity of an organization? I think it's very important because whatever you do in terms of marketing has to be in sync with the entire control framework so that, the organization as a whole is adding value to the ecosystem as well. It sounds very fluffy, but it is actually so important. I come across many instances whereby people do things for the sake of doing it without really thinking about what's the impact to the brand, to the company's value, etc. So taking on Prof. Session earlier this morning, I will share that with my people. I think that's so important for them to understand.
So, Peter, you have been mentioned a couple of times. So I think I will give you the last word, if you want.
I'm not sure that you should do that, but to reiterate what I tried to say is that I've been listening with some fascination. This is really a world that I don't know, the internal controls world. I mean, I know how it feeds into market values because of the research that I've read and because of my own personal experience having conversations about it. So it was fascinating to hear. I don't think the market should dictate your framework, but you should be able to translate what your framework does for you into something that is value relevant for firms, be it brand equity, be it expense control, be it assuring that the data is correctly used and things like that. And that is how we will connect both the internal world of the firm with what external stakeholders would like to get out of it. And that, I think,
Great. Fantastic, fantastic assurances given that principles will remain the same, but applications will change. So I'd like to thank the panel. Can you join me in thanking the panel for the insights? And thank you very much, audience, for sending in your questions. Thank you.